مساء الخير واهلا بيكم في اخر سيشن في المؤتمر المهم جدا اللي بقالنا يومين دلوقتي بنناقش مستقبل وسط البلد وبعض المواضيع التانية اللي ليها علاقة بوسط البلد. احنا يعني تقريبا خدنا قرار انه هندير السيشن الاخراني ده باللغة الانجليزية لأن معظم المتحدثين هيتكلموا باللغة الإنجليزية. So, welcome to the last session of the Creative Cities Conference, and thank you for staying here for this last session. It's always very nice to see a packed hall for the last session, because usually on the last session of a two-day conference, the hall tends to peter out. My name is Tariq Ataya. I'm the publisher of Mantiqti newspaper, جريدة منطقتي وسط البلد. I'd just like to tell you a bit about the newspaper and what we're trying to do here in downtown as an introduction maybe to myself and to some of my colleagues who are here with us, and maybe to address some of the points also that were mentioned in previous sessions and as a lead up to this session. About 2.5 years ago, we decided to start a newspaper called Mantiqti, My Neighborhood. It wasn't called Mantiqti Wust al-Balad at that time, it was called Mantiqti al-Bursa. And the genesis for that newspaper began maybe 6 months prior to that. To be honest with you, the genesis for that newspaper began many years prior to that, from the idea that my colleagues and I at the Egypt Media Development Program had regarding the need for local media in Egypt, not just in downtown Cairo, but all across the country, and especially in a city like Cairo. What I mean by local media is media that covers a limited geographical area and covers it with the same sort of intensity and professionalism as any national or regional media entity. Now, when did we decide to start it exactly in downtown? It was about 6 months after our company established its office in the Bursa neighborhood, which you may be familiar with, which is right behind the central bank and the main branch of Bank Al-Ahli, where the stock exchange is. Now, we had invested, a lot of effort and time and money in the office that we took there on the ground floor of Alwi Street, and we really liked the way the neighborhood at that time. If you've been there now, you'll know that it's not like that anymore. But we really liked the very lively spirit of the neighborhood. There were about we didn't know exactly how many at the time, but later we found out there were 35 coffee shops. هناك في المنطقة دي 35 coffee shops, and if you had been to that area in the last 3 years, you would know that it was one of the liveliest places in downtown Cairo. There was a very exciting and interesting scene going on there, and that was one of the reasons why we opened our office right in the heart of that neighborhood. And then one day we came to work in the morning, and we were shocked to find these white painted boxes about 1 meter wide right in front of the office on the street, and they were numbered, and there was about 90 of them. All of a sudden we came to work to see that, so we started asking around what's going on, and then we discovered that there was some strange plan to move the street sellers who were sort of occupying the main streets of downtown by the thousands, to move them into Alwi Street, this small kind of pedestrian street that our office was in. We weren't the only ones who were shocked about this. When we talked to our neighbors, whether they were residents or businesses or some of the coffee shops there in the neighborhood, we found out that everyone was shocked about this. In fact, nobody knew how the decision had been taken, who had taken the decision, why it was taken, or what exactly was going to happen. Now, at that point in time, a kind of lobby emerged, a sort of ad hoc lobby between the residents of the neighborhood to kind of find out what was going on and to pressure the local authorities to change their mind about this decision. You have to think about how it felt to be, say, a business owner or a resident or something like that, when all of a sudden the street in front of you, if you'd lived your whole life there, if you'd invested there, whatever, for whatever reason, all of a sudden a decision is taken regarding the nature of that street, a decision in which you play no role at all in the way that decision was taken. What we found when we talked to our neighbors is that there was this strong desire for people to actually play a part in the sort of decisions that were taken regarding the place where they lived or worked or visited. And it was from that realization that people wanted to have a say in their local surroundings that we realized that the old idea we had to start a local newspaper, we didn't have to wait any longer. We should just start it now, here, and in this neighborhood. And so that's what we did. We put a business plan together. We had editorial meetings to decide what the form and shape of the newspaper would be. And we decided that it would be a newspaper that would cover just those 3 streets in the Borsa. So it was called Mantiqati al-Borsa. And we went through a bunch of different names, but then we finally decided that we would call it Mantiqati to reflect the ethos of the newspaper, which is my neighborhood. And for the first year we did this, you would never find anything in that newspaper that was going on outside of the 3 streets of El Borsa. But at the same time, you would find a lot of material about El Borsa, including maps and infographics and things about where to park, how the garbage is collected, issues that we thought were of interest to the neighborhood residents. After a year of this, and having received a lot of sort of good feedback from the community, we decided that maybe we could expand our scope a little bit, and we decided that the newspaper would cover the wider downtown area. And we adjusted the name a little bit, and it became called Mantiqati Wust al-Balad. And just to show you a couple, I mean, some of you I think have gotten the paper from our stand out there, but I just wanted to show you some of the covers and how the paper has kind of changed from its first days as Mantiqati al-Borsa to Mantiqati Wust al-Balad. And one of the things this paper is trying to do is it's trying to address a problem that has been mentioned many, many times in this conference, and that is the lack of information. I've heard this being repeated over and over again, that those of us in downtown, we're lacking information about the sort of basic statistics about the area, how many buildings, detailed information about the local government, how they take decisions, what those decisions are based on. And this paper is basically an attempt to fill that gap and to provide that information. Of course, it's reasonable to assume that after 2.5 to 3 years, not everybody downtown will have seen the paper or heard about it or even had the chance to really delve deep into it. But we've tried our best to improve our distribution network. Right now, we distribute 10,000 copies of the paper, and those we distribute in a way that kind of makes it possible for 7 to 8 people to read each copy. We've tweaked that over time. I mean, before, when you go and distribute to the stores or the residences, everybody wants a copy for themselves. So we've kind of changed the distribution strategy so that people are sharing the paper. And the reason why we have to do this is because the journalism that we're trying to produce in Mantiqati is an attempt to produce high quality journalism and provide it for free to the residents and visitors and businesses of the neighborhood. That's an expensive endeavor, and it depends on the support of local businesses and sponsors, local sponsors. And that is the business model of Mantiqati. It's been a challenge over the last 3 years to keep that going. Thankfully, we have. That's the way I think you build kind of a brand and a reputation and trust amongst the community. And the one thing that we can say that we have, I think, succeeded at in the last 3 years is to keep that kind of concept of Mantiti as a platform for discussion. We don't really take sides. So we've been involved in many of the issues over the last 3 years that downtown has dealt with, including the street sellers phenomenon, including the recent changes in the parking situation, the traffic situation, including the plan to restore some of the buildings, including so many of the different initiatives of civil society in downtown. We've tried to be a platform where everybody can have their space, and I think as a result we are equally trusted by all the different stakeholders in downtown. By this I mean residents, visitors, businesses, small and large, and the government. So I urge you to look at the paper. Hopefully you become one of our readers, and we're always looking for feedback. Our team is constantly trying to improve what we're doing, and we look forward to hearing from everybody regarding how we can do a better job of covering downtown, and also if anybody has an issue that they feel is not getting enough coverage. Again, Mantiti is the place to come with that issue, and we will try our best to cover it in the best way possible. That for me is the segue kind of to our panel here, because I think this panel also is kind of a platform for some of the alternative approaches to downtown and its future. And we have a very illustrious group of speakers, including, of course, the main organizers of the conference. And I think Omar and Beth are going to start the session. Omar Nagati and Beth Stryker are the founders of Cluster, which has been working for many years in downtown Cairo and elsewhere to present very deeply researched and highly integrated ideas for a better future for different neighborhoods. But today they're going to focus on downtown and some of the very specific work that they've done there.
Thank you, Tore. Just a correction, we haven't been working for many years, just 3 years plus, or 4. Okay, what we'd like to share with you today, something that has been also brought up during the past couple of days, namely the question of governance and decision-making process. And I'm glad Tore referred to Al-Bursa as an example, that you wake up one day and you find your street turn into a parking or no parking, or a one-way street or what have you, without knowing who decided and why and when and what the process whereby decision being made. So the project we're going to talk about is sort of it fits into a model that we've been trying to adopt, is to reflect on a framework or a vision, if you will, of a larger area like downtown. But when it comes to action or practice, we focus on a very limited scope, a very small project to test this hypothesis. So for us, it's a mechanism to learn and then revisit the hypothesis. So the hypothesis that we have, it's about passageways. That's already some of you, we would like to have some of you yesterday to walk with me and some of our colleagues through the passageway downtown. So we're going to talk about this passage as a framework for reimagining and re-envisioning downtown. And then in the second part, we're going to talk 1 or 2 specific pilot projects that are trying to take this broader approach or framework and try to look at specific sites. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some of the database and the networking platforms that we're also interested in creating, like this conference, but also other digital platforms to document some of the sites downtown, including heritage buildings, but also including passageway and other sites of significance, and make it more inclusive. And invite you to participate and collaborate with us as in sort of filling up this framework. So I'm gonna do it myself. Okay. So we have like 15 minutes or something. 15, okay, so we'll make fair. So most of what we've been hearing the last couple of days, downtown is often represented and mediated through the main streets and magnificent buildings and squares modeled after European cities, as we heard before. But there is other side of downtown that we got interested in a few years ago, which is the back alleys and the gaps between the buildings and the little courtyards and the dead-end streets and the side streets that were turned into pedestrian de facto or through governmental approaches, as we've been seeing in the last presentations. What's interesting in these passageways are in themselves as a space is a very interesting urban morphology or typology, because it is really a physical container, but it's more than that. It is a space of mediation and negotiation between different realms, the public realm and the private realm, between the formal capital A architecture designed by great, the vernacular architecture and the street vendors happening on the street. But it's also mediation between different grids, as you will see, where the two grids collide. And also more metaphorically, that the passageway as a passage is really a transitional space or a liminal space between two different orders. And it's very convenient in the time that we're all undergoing a process of transition politically and urbanistically, to use this metaphor to test how can we as citizens of the city engage in such a very small scale exercise to see how can we renegotiate our position vis-a-vis the different stakeholders that we're talking about, the owners, the shopkeepers, the vendors, the residents, and so on. So what we'll try to show you is more of a process than a design. We're interested more in the process, but we'll also show you how we did it design-wise. So we first started as documenting. We were fascinated by this. I'm sure so all of you by now have seen most of these places. So passageways are either designed to be sort of a portal through a building or cluster of buildings, or formally pedestrianized, as Dr. Galila showed us this morning, Al Borsa area, Al Alfi, and later Shawarbi in the mid-90s. And some of them were filled up by stores, or some of the shops extended, leaving the minimum code, the sort of, as Karim called it, performance-based standards or local codes. Like we measured 2.5 meter as what we saw is except for a few cases that I will show you. So we looked at all the proportions, the different things, and then we sort of came up with this hypothesis that how can we look at this passageway collectively as a way to reimagine, as I said, so re-experience downtown from the inside out, but also as a space of alternative and more diverse and more sort of a space of accommodating multiple activities, unlike the main facade of the buildings. So it started out as a project at the university in 2011. After revolution, we will build this model with a student and took it downtown, and we built the model with the local community and started to take their feedback about what they like. And it was a very conceptual exercise at this phase. And then later on, we started to develop this more systematically by looking at, the typical planning exercise of land use and heights and so on and so forth, the proportion, the street typology, the dead ends, and so on. So all the kind of the tools that we as architects know, and then looking at the different materiality and so on and so forth, and just examples of some of the research that we're building up over the last 3 years. Then in early 2014, we decided to test this hypothesis by looking at the very topic of this conference: how can art and culture play a role as a catalyst to revitalize downtown, but also particularly looking at one site. So in this particular case, it was a series of storefront, and how can you use that to animate otherwise not very active passageways. So I'm going to hand over to Beth to talk about this.
So the passageway that we selected was the Kodak Passage, and one of the reasons we chose this passageway was because of its proximity to a number of art and culture initiatives downtown. These are independent spaces, but most of them are up a couple of floors. They're in residential buildings. CIC is one of them. Cimatech is across the street. And we were asking from the street level, how could we help to sort of animate and sort of draw attention to the activity that's happening in this northern part of downtown. These are the 4 storefronts that we selected and we renovated for the exhibition. It was a solo exhibition of the artist Hassan Khan, an Egyptian artist. He had not shown in Cairo at that point for around 10 years, although he had been celebrated and showing internationally. And we partnered with DCAF, the Downtown Contemporary Arts Festival, on this exhibition. It was premiered as part of their festival. This is just part of the renovation that we did. We knew all along this would be a temporary exhibition. The spaces themselves were owned by Ismaila. Karim Shafei talked about his interest in partnering with art and culture. And of course, as Omar mentioned, we were interested in the question of how can art and culture be a catalyst for urban development. At the same time, one of the questions we at Cluster keep trying to ask is how can artists also maintain a stake in the neighborhoods they help develop? And I think this test case sort of brought that very much to the forefront for us as an office. This is during the renovation installation with Hassan Khan. And this is during the exhibition opening. You can see that, you can't tell from this picture, but we actually had the exhibition interface directly with the street. So this sound and light installation interfaced directly with the passageway. So what had been a dark passageway, felt a little bit unsafe. The street lamps hadn't been working for quite some time, suddenly became animated with sound and light over the course of the exhibition. And this slide is just to show the passageway before the exhibition, and then this is on the right during the opening. Immediately following the exhibition, we decided to take our pilot project a bit further and ask ourselves, what can we do to redesign the public space of the passageway itself? We partnered with Egyptian and Danish artists and architects, and we did a workshop to develop concepts for both the Kodak Passage and the Phillips Passage, which is an adjacent passageway. Part of the exercise for us as Cluster was to do a stakeholder analysis. At that point, because of the project we had done with the Hassan Khan exhibition, we'd been working in Kodak for over a year. We became familiar with people in the neighborhood, and we went around asking them what did they want to see, what didn't they want to see, both in Kodak and in Phillips. And we used that information to develop a design brief that we then gave to the participants in the design workshop. This is during the workshop itself, so we developed a maquette of the two different passageways so that the designers could test out their ideas with the community and get their feedback. And this is during the workshop. And as a result, we had two ideas that were selected. It was a short workshop, so basically concepts were developed rather than actual designs. For the Kodak Alley, the green oasis was the idea that won, and that was sort of building on what was already a calm space, but trying to introduce greenery into this as a sort of pedestrian park. And then we at Cluster took these concepts that won, and we developed the designs, and we went ahead and undertook the implementation of these redesigns of the public spaces. So this was just trying to find out what native trees and shrubs and flowering plants might be able to grow in the passageway. This was an early rendering of some of the concepts. We had to go through quite a lot of approvals in order to get this project to happen. This is some of that process. I think it was 7 different agencies. If you're interested, Omar can delineate them all for you. This took us a good part of this summer, so let's say about 3 months of, and our staff are nodding their heads because they know just how difficult this was. This was during the renovation itself. Again, for us, we're talking about tiling here in part because it was these were tools for negotiation with the different stakeholders. Some past some of the storefronts, they want to have no grooves because it's too hard to clean. Or, I mean, it was really every design element became a tool for us to engage the participation of the community in the design process. This is, again, introducing light and seating. Benches became a real subject of contestation. Again, looking at greenery also as a way to mediate between the public and the private sort of elements of the passage. This was, again, looking at the question of the lighting. We returned to what was one of the early fixtures that was still remaining in the passageway from the 1930s. We refabricated this and installed it. This was during the public opening in January of this year. And also we invited the different art organizations to come and join us, and we had a concert, we had screenings from Cimatech in the public spaces of the passageways. And this is post-renovation, also just keeping track of how has the usage changed, because part of what we were interested in was how to make this a more accessible, more diverse public space, and we've been pleased to see the usage. This is Phillips. I'll just quickly click through this prior to the renovation. And again, the winning concept was the light oasis. We introduced signage outside, a marquee, as well as a screening space inside, where Cematech did some of these screenings during the renovation. And we also opened up the cafe windows so that we could continue to use that as a screening space for the public. I'm going to pass it back to Omar.
Right. Okay. So in the last few minutes, the last few minutes just to talk about how can this pilot, which is, very small scale, and the design is not really, that out of ordinary. It's actually, in a way, interesting. Some people may like it or not, but the process is really what really intrigued us, because as Beth said, it took to undergo a project in the public realm is very different from, as most architects know, different from working on private property. We can sort of fence off your property and do whatever you want after acquiring the permit, and then there you go. But here the process during the construction and before the construction and after the construction, you're subjected to all sorts of jurisdictions. So not only you have to acquire the approval or 7 different authorities, and not all of them are in tune, but also during the construction to bring a truck of sand, you have to get approval of the security next door. Everybody's passing by asking you who you are, what you're doing, how to do it better, but also who's funding you. So you're always kind of scrutinized by the public eye, by the residents, by even the type of flowers, the type of plants, is all who are also giving advices to make it better and make it a different way. So it was us really an attempt to use these very simple design elements like the bench or the tile or the tree or the lamp as sites where these competing interests intersect, but also as a way to negotiate, to find a common ground. We subscribed during our other project in the street vendor that it is really not a zero-sum formula. So to evict street vendor altogether is not a good idea, and to leave the status quo is not also a good idea. But there's always a space, critical balance, to develop something that you would get the concession or at least 60-70% approval from everybody, as opposed to one person gets everything and the other person leaves without anything. So the idea is to make some sort of urban diplomacy, a negotiation, to say, okay, I'm gonna change the tile if you give me approval to put the bench, stuff like that. So all these kind of design elements was really a process to test, does that work or not? So where does this take us? Take us to, okay, so if you go back to what Dr. Sahar showed us, like the plan, the formal plan of downtown, were in many ways predicated on the separation between pedestrian and vehicular, whether in the 60s or the competition in 2008. But what we're interested in doing is to try to conceive a vision whereby this network of passageway, as some of us walked with me yesterday, could collectively offer different narratives, whether you're looking at the cafes or the bars or the old barber shops or the studios like Paul showed us, or the literary tour. So the tours that we actually used you as test, basically, to see to what extent that these passageways could offer an alternative way to experience downtown, and therefore to envision alternative ways to develop it. So what we did is we're still building up this database, doing all sorts of analysis. Now we're looking also at rooftops, something that we'd like to talk to Galil about, as another network of semi-public spaces that collective could also offer other sort of publicness. And these are other ideas we can talk to you about the discussion, to have roof gardens and culinary programs and so on and so forth. But then the culmination of that is how to make this information available and accessible to researchers and practitioners and policymakers alike. So what we just launched along this conference is a website that Beth will just conclude the discussion about. A website that is a sister to our initial website, which is Cairo Urban Initiative Platform, looking at the art initiatives. So this is sort of the flip side of the site. So instead of looking at locations of initiatives like Townhouse or CIC or Cematech or Cluster or AUC, to look at, instead of looking at locations, or coordinates, through dots, we're looking at sites that you can measure the area, the facade, and also the land use. And also it involves making interviews with stakeholders and some visual experience and materiality. So
I'm just going to actually click through this, and if you want, you can continue to talk, because I think since we're so short on time, I would actually just encourage you. We have this website out in the lobby. We also have published this guidebook. It's a walking tour of the downtown passageways, and this is just a way to introduce you to some of the information that's in the database. We have 3 years of research. There's quite a lot of material, and we have people in the lobby who can help introduce you to this, and the website address is published on this little guide that you can pick up outside. This is the flip side of that website, which is the directory and calendar Omar had mentioned.
So, just finally, what all this fit into a larger framework that we'd like to help or contribute to build downtown, about a mapping initiative that we incorporate the different multiple initiatives, like a lot of stuff being going on in downtown, as we all see, from independent initiative as well as governments, as well as private sector. So what we're trying to do in this conference and this platform to help promote as I said, a platform or a forum whereby all these kind of efforts could be coordinated, so there's little duplication, more coordination, and that it becomes a tool for participation and people have say, and it becomes cumulative project for downtown, and hopefully if it succeeds we can also work on Heliopolis and Garden City and other places that some others suggested. So I think we'll finish with this. So this is just an image of this mapping initiative database. You can see some of the spaces, and this is just a typical fact sheet. And I think George could also help us to one the category, who the architect, when it was built, the style, and so on. And when it was cited in literature, and you can end up with a very rich, multi-layered map of downtown, including all the different layers and activities and stakeholders. And I think that's what we're trying to do, and thank you so much for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omar. Thank you very much, Beth.